Hello and welcome to CSO Connected. I'm Tamara McMillan, and I'm thrilled to be here today to speak to Neil Whitelock. He's the Vice President of Enterprise Sales for EMEA, for Strategy to Revenue, and he's going to speak with us about SaaS. But before we get started, could you please tell us a little bit about Strategy to Revenue?
Sure, and good morning, and great to be here. Strategy to Revenue is a sales enablement company. We are headquartered in London with regional and global clients. We work closely with generally enterprise clients and help them go through either a business transformation, a business turnaround, or help them onboard new solutions, new sales teams. Ultimately, we are helping them to understand the root cause and find solutions.
Excellent. Well, obviously companies that look at going to SaaS or have moved to SaaS, or even those that begin to sell SaaS and move out of the product space, face all those challenges. So you're perfectly suited to help us through this topic today.
It's a large market indeed, and a lot of people looking at this at the moment.
Excellent. Well, I hope to break it down a bit for our audience. SaaS is a term that's certainly been around for a long time. And today I think it means a lot of different things. So for clarity, how should we define SaaS for the purpose of our conversation?
Well, I think the journey's been, as you quite rightly point out, a long one. It started with things like on demand, which was a tagline that IBM brought to market. I think we use cloud as a very broad catch-all subject. You can look at subscription, generally a Netflix consumer orientation where you're literally paying for use and you can turn on and turn off and walk away. For me, and for the purpose of the conversation today, SaaS or software as a service brings a bit more in the way of corporate structure. So you've got a consumption-based application. You're generally looking at a commercial term, maybe a minimum term, and it's delivering that as a service to the client. So a little more structure than pure subscription.
Okay, and as we've already said, it's not new, right? I mean, it's been around for a long time, but in the last few years, the traction seems to have increased, and it's a hot topic of conversation.
Sure.
Why do you think that is?
I think fundamentally it's down to market adoption. Corporates have moved from ownership and are now looking at this consumption process or consumption option. However, along that journey, there's lots of considerations, and probably the biggest one is around that shift, which is very much a business decision. Do we own and operate, or do we consume and focus our business on our core service delivery or our core focus in the marketplace? I think security also has a big play in this, as security itself has become a bigger challenge, but also as the security market will profess, they've been able to solve many of these problems and illustrate to enterprise clients that you can move to the cloud and still be secure. That's enabled these corporates to actually now start that adoption process, which is why we see this considerable shift towards SaaS itself.
So it sounds like both consumer confidence and corporate confidence are there. Technology has arrived, and so now there's sort of that almost economic P&L freedom to say, hey, we can begin to take better ownership of the things that we do well, let other people handle the stuff that they would do better.
And we've had many of our clients go, why would I really want to pay for my engineers to look at flashing lights in data centers to keep an application running, when in fact I can consume that application and turn those engineers into customer-facing engagement experts that bring value to my clients.
The other side of this, of course, is the part that's near and dear to our hearts and to the CSO audience, which is for sales. As companies look around the market and they realize they can't just sell products anymore, they need to sell services and they need to themselves offer things in a SaaS model. But that's a big undertaking. So if you approach a company or they come to you for advice on how do we make that shift in terms from a selling standpoint, what does that business need to consider?
We summarize it under three headers of people, process, and tools. And yes, it is a holistic view. We've had clients come to us, as an example, in the very early days of SaaS. And this was in the time when even Netflix was still sending out DVDs in the post.
I used to get them.
So showing our age. And we work with some very early adopters from a sales perspective in that SaaS market. What happened was, from a sales point of view, they were very successful because they were bringing something new to market. They were early adopters from a user perspective. But they found very quickly they had some problems in that their salespeople were winning business, but then spending up to 75% of their time processing the business.
All right.
Because they hadn't got the back office lined up. So it became counterintuitive from a sort of a growth opportunity to actually creating a problem elsewhere in the business. So let's start with process. It's probably the most boring one of them from a sales perspective, but it's one of the most critical. As a sales organisation, you've got to look at it, effectively verify, do my processes lend themselves to that shift from one-time selling, so a CapEx sale with probably an annual service contract, to that continual billing process.
It's a very dangerous thing to do. So how do you create that unique value proposition
Correct.
in doing essentially what everyone else in the market is doing, and particularly if you're late?
And we've seen, we've probably both seen in the technology market leaders, followers, and then laggards.
Yeah.
And there's been a few large and well-known brands that are fundamentally laggards in this shift from on-prem or one-time sales to service-based selling, i.e. managed services, to SaaS. And you're quite right. If you just virtualize a solution and you do just get the processing right, customers are going to go, so what?
Yeah,
It's the same
nothing
device,
new.
it's just a different commercial model. So absolutely, you've got to look at the insights and the nuances and go, right, where through this transformation, where can I really create a difference? Is it in my messaging, in the delivery, in the way we engage, in the commercial model? And you'll generally find it's a good balance of all of those.
I know I've also experienced where eager companies that move into SaaS and a SaaS offering, I think they have to be quite disciplined with saying yes in the early days, because those initial opportunities I've found, and I'll be curious to hear your experience, tend to be those that stretch you beyond what's on the truck in a fairly significant way. But we're so excited because it's an amazing opportunity of trust. And in taking on those projects, I've seen organizations almost collapse their effort because it's handcuffed all of the resources. Is that something that you see as common, or definitely one of those pitfalls to watch out for so that you can scale quickly?
It's both a lever and a potential challenge and issue, in that historically a sales organisation, whether it be a channel partner or a distributor, would go, yes, let's go through a pragmatic process of getting into the portfolio, and in doing so, you'll then pull through all the business requirements around the processing, the billing, and how you administer the business. I think the market's now become so dynamic that actually, in the conversations we're having, people's default reaction is, if we've found an opportunity, we will use that opportunity to help change the way we operate. And you go, it's very sensible, because you're going, that validates the fact there is a real need in the marketplace. But it does potentially bring those other issues through, which is you're then delivering against futures rather than having built the foundation. Somewhere between the two is always a good balance, rather than going to that extreme level of, promising something perhaps you'll find some speed humps along the way with.
So we talked about people, processes, and tools a little bit, but let's go into the people aspect a bit more. Salespeople, I don't know if we all like change. Some do, and some embrace it really well, and others struggle. And when you move from selling products into selling SaaS, it's fair to probably say that your stakeholders can be different, certainly a broader audience. The way that you engage in conversations with customers is different. And certainly the conversation's not often led with features, benefits, and pricing. It's led in a conversation around outcomes.
Correct.
So how do you take sales on a journey?
There's 2 or 3 things for consideration from a sales leader perspective, but also from that salesperson. You can look forward, and you can look sideways. And to summarise, the response before we get there, from our perspective, we look at 2 things, which is the efficiency of sales and then the enablement of sales. As you go through any form of change, you've got to consider how that sales motion can be efficient. And that's going to be that leverage of the tools and the processes.
Well, because you want the revenue stream to keep coming in and not drop off whilst you're going through that
Because you've got this
process.
huge potential issue as a sales organisation that you're going to see a revenue drop as you move from that one-time revenue to that that monthly reoccurring or MRR. And those change cycles can take anything from 6 months. I've seen organisations move very quickly because the market demand is so great they can backfill that drop to 3 years, which is the natural period as you move from that one time to an MRR. So you've got the efficiency, you've got the effectiveness, and you've got clearly the financial impact. If you're looking forward as a sales leader or as a sales entity, fundamentally you need to look at, right, what is the market demand? What is the buying behavior? What are the outcomes we're looking to achieve? Can my current sales force deliver against that? We would recommend building some form of competency process or have a competency tool so that you can map out what are the attributes I want these SaaS-based salespeople to bring to market. Yeah. And it's going to be different things. It's going to be around business acumen. It's going to be around insights. You know, the days of feature, function, benefit, and all of this traditional stuff long gone. And to your point, customers are looking for outcomes, and SaaS gives them a line of sight to fairly quick remedies because SaaS is fundamentally quick and easy to deliver. So you've got that look forward. You've got the competency requirement, and then you can, in theory, take your existing sales force through that competency process. It can be tool-based, hopefully, because it gives you scale and repeatability. And you can very quickly work out, right, of my current team, who is able to change, because it's the able and willing, who's got the skills and the attributes to be able to operate in that space. Yeah. Are they willing? Back to fundamentally, as salespeople, we're not born to adopt change easily. I think it's a human trait rather than just a sales trait. So you then look forward, there's that piece. Look sideways. Who in your ecosystem, firstly within the company, potentially has the attributes that actually respond to the market demand? You'll find people possibly in customer success or services or inside sales that maybe show the attributes needed in that new marketplace. Beyond that, potentially look to external support. Bring in a consultant, bring in an organisation like ours that will help you run the discovery, understand the needs, go through the competency modelling, and create the outcome.
Yeah. I think that sounds quite sensible. It's always around how well you can execute against that plan, isn't it? And I mean, in fairness, in technology, I would say those salespeople are more adept and comfortable with change. And yet, so if you're selling technology products, moving to SaaS is probably not as uncomfortable as in other businesses, which may be adopting something quite revolutionary for them. But it is important to take them on that journey and to give them the tools. And one of the tools that's so near and dear to the heart of a salesperson is how they're paid. Compensation is both an art and a science. I think, how do we pay people to do the things that we want them to do and adequately reward them when they exceed expectations, and also discourage the things that we don't want. And when a salesperson can make their quota doing what they've always done and selling what they've always sold, we find that it's difficult to get them to sell the new things or the new way. So talk to us a little bit about compensation and what kinds of changes that may need to go through. And people beyond sales have compensation. And now that we're reaching into more of the organization in order to deliver SaaS solutions, does their compensation change?
As you quite rightly say, comp is an art. It is a clear art form. And again, we've seen organisations virtualise the business, get the process right, and then leave the comp alone. And then 3 to 6 months later, shrugging their shoulders and challenging the business, why aren't we selling this? Why haven't we seen this shift? Why can't we respond to market demand? So it's one of the priorities in any form of transformation, that people, process, tools. Wherever you place comp, it's critical. There's two ways to look at it. Compensation, if done well, will align to the strategy. So it will complement where the corporate wants to go or where it wants to be, and quite rightly drive behaviour. From a sales perspective, it needs to reward for where the corporate wants to be. And if you're going through this process of moving from one-time to services or SaaS, it's at least got to be equal to selling a one-time solution. So if you can get that equitable status, then the sales organisation is in a position to empower that sales team to provide or do what's best for the client. Because back to that very first question, there may well be clients that stick with a traditional on-prem or hosted environment for a security reason, or they wish to have a hybrid environment. So they'll put email and desktop device or applications into the cloud, but their core services remain on-premise. So you want to enable and empower the team to do what's right for the client, which is why that comp needs to cover both aspects.
Yeah.
Now, if you want to really shift the business, you can obviously push the lever a little harder and go, we'll reward multiples for selling a particular outcome. But again, it's still got to be with the customer's best interests at heart, on the basis that as a sales organisation, you've got your strategy right and your business outcomes are aligned to market.
It is true, because if you over-incentivize and ultimately create sort of bad sales behavior because they want to grab that carrot, the customer ends up usually being sold something that they didn't need, didn't want, or doesn't deliver what they were expecting, and that ill will in the market does far more damage, doesn't it?
Correct. And again, this is why compensation is such an art. It is integral. It is the glue that brings the sales strategy and the sales motion together.
Yeah.
And it's why it will take time to get that right. It's not a 5-minute job. And again, we've seen clients get it right. We've helped clients move through that process. We've also seen it have that negative impact where it's either not enabled or empowered, or it has gone too far.
Yeah.
And you end up with a slightly contradictory or difficult outcome.
Yeah, I certainly have worked with organizations and designed compensation plans of a variety of sorts. And I think it's always interesting when you're introducing new products or new services. Do you start with, bonusing or providing multipliers, as you said, on top of those new services to encourage people? Do you give a bit of stick, and do you penalize those who don't sell a portion of these products or services in the year? So I think a lot of times it is trial and error to figure out what works in the business. And I'm guessing you'd agree that when you can involve the salespeople more directly in a voice around designing that compensation plan, ensuring it's still aligning to the overall objectives of the business, it tends to be a bit more successful than sort of doing it to them, if you will.
Sure, and going through that redesign process is more than just, dare I say, an HR task, which is where generally comp and people's well-being sits. You need to involve the salespeople, probably sales operations, because they've got to help administer this process. Clearly, the board need to be there as sponsors by driving the outcomes or creating the ability for the outcomes to be delivered. So it is very much a collective effort in that respect.
Perfect. Well, besides going to market directly, obviously organizations go to market in an indirect fashion, utilizing channels and partners to extend their reach in the marketplace and to sample new markets, for example. When you make a shift like going to SaaS model from what you're selling to your end clients, how do you bring the channel along? Because you naturally already have a gap. It's much easier to enable your direct sales force because you have a lot of control over the messaging, over how much training they do or don't receive, and also over that compensation model. But within the channel, there's a bit of a gap, and there's also a trust in the execution. What advice can you give us for how we work with the channel as we make that shift?
Again, it's understanding how important is the channel to the sales organisation. We're looking effectively at a vendor here which has possibly a direct sales force and a channel. Most vendors in the European market rely very heavily on channel. So it's a very important part of the business. You've got to get this right. There's 2 or 3 key aspects, which is one of enablement, which is, again, how can you help the channel go through the changes that you are making as the vendor or as the sales organisation. You need to look at segmentation. You will probably find not all of the channel is ready to shift or wants to shift. And you need to go into this journey with eyes wide open and work out if people are not ready to shift or don't want to because they feel they're specialising in certain sectors. Okay, how can they help complement the business that we will still have with clients that want to stay in that on-prem world? Those that want to shift, it really is a case of, okay, how can we help them move? There's going to be challenges and therefore opportunities to help around people again. Is the sales motion in the channel ready to sell SaaS? Have they got the same skills that you want your direct salespeople to have around business acumen, selling the outcomes, not the product? The most important one we've seen and the biggest challenge we've seen is around cash flow. Again, the partners are generally geared around historically on-prem sales, annual service contracts, and to make that considerable shift, it is crossing the chasm. And so as a vendor, you want to be able to go, right, how can we help them from that financial management perspective? Now, there's various levers available, whether it be extending credit terms or helping them financially move across that chasm, but deep consideration required.
And I think, again, it's around how you compensate them. But those sales cycles, when you're talking about cash flow, what I think of is, the SaaS sales cycle is longer, isn't it, than just selling a product. Because, again, it's involving more pieces, more stakeholders. So you're right that a channel, if they're used to a very transactional financial relationship, moving to something that is less predictable, certainly in the early days at least, that can really be a discouragement. And since many of them are smaller to mid-sized businesses, it's very meaningful when the cash flow has a disruption.
And there's added challenges. The data comes out of Gartner on a quarterly basis. There's now something like 6.7 stakeholders involved in an acquisition. Yeah. Whatever the exact metric, but the customer's 50% through the sales cycle before they engage a vendor, because they've become intelligent buyers, and because SaaS as a model enables them to run their own insights and due diligence before they engage the market. So the window to sell becomes a little shorter. The customer, in theory, has gone through the I'm ready to change. So it's the change to who. They've made some conscious decisions internally. So you're coming in later, and the customer's already created this framework of where they're heading. So yes, the sales cycle in theory can be longer, but the actual window of engagement potentially becomes a little shorter, which is where getting the salespeople ready for this. And being able to provide insights to the client, have the business acumen so they're aware of what the customer is looking to achieve, and possibly moving away from lots of questions. We get feedback now from CXO that they don't just want to sit through 20 questions of tell me about your business, right? They're expecting you or I or a salesperson to walk in with insights and value, not a bunch of questions.
Yeah, provide some challenge. And it leads to one other question that I had, which is, how do you solve the credibility problem if I've been a product company and now I'm in the SaaS space? We know that those first wins, which we talked about, are really important, and they can certainly help build that brand confidence that, okay, yeah, you really can do this. But how do you land those first few? How do you change the conversation with the customer that you've been talking to about products into one where now you want to deliver the services?
There's no doubt it's a challenge. You are shifting the way the customer's buying. They're shifting the way they think, and they are quite rightly in a position to challenge you if they've been buying from you historically, either as a leader, why change, or as potentially as somebody as a follower. Well, somebody else is ahead of the game. Why should I consider you when somebody else is further down the path? There's no silver bullet to that. It is really a case of going through the processes and the outlines we've shared and discussed in the last 20 minutes or so to illustrate that you have the business set up in the right way, that you have hopefully some marquee accounts that have already moved to that space, or potentially leaning on, if you're selling a vendor solution, leaning on that vendor or that SaaS provider to provide some of the comfort factor around that shift.
I think those are great suggestions, because it is about comfort. And you're right, if you approach first customers who either have already gone to SaaS in some other capacity, they won't have a fear of SaaS. And certainly I think it speaks to how important it always is to have great customer experience, great customer relationships, because if people trust you once, they're more likely to trust you again, particularly if you're asking them to sort of go down a new venture with you,
Which is why there's a lot of dollars spent on things like marketing. It's around brand awareness and pushing your brand in front of the client.
Absolutely.
And delivering that so-called comfort factor or good feel.
Yeah, they do help us tell the story, that's for sure.
Correct.
We've had a lot of different topics that we've covered today, but if there was one key takeaway that you would want to offer and leave with the audience, what would that be?
Our recommendation, quite clearly, is go through that process of looking at your process, the people and the tools. If it's the right thing to do it well. But the one message I give is, if you're going to do it, just execute. Don't go in and do half a job, because we've seen, unfortunately, too many companies, whether they be vendors or partners, try and play and it doesn't work. You've got to commit to the cause, have the plan, execute, and probably use that horizon way to get in a small focused start, and then drive the business from there. Excellent. Well, I've certainly walked away from the conversation knowing more about SaaS, and I thank you so much for your time today. I hope that everyone who's watched this video is also walking away feeling a little bit more empowered about SaaS. Thank you.